very good morning to you. Welcome to Breakfast with Dan Walker and Louise Minchin.
It's exactly 8 o'clock. These are your Monday morning headlines. Self-isolate or face a £1,000 fine. New laws come into effect in England today for anyone testing positive for coronavirus.
3 more areas of Wales are going into local lockdown, meaning nearly 2/3 of the country will be living under tighter restrictions.
The Earth under threat, an exclusive with Sir David Attenborough, who tells us about his fears for the planet and how young people can save it.
It's their world and it's there tomorrow. I won't be there. They will be. It's theirs. And if they aren't persuaded that it's important, we're wasting our time.
Good morning. There's plenty of stock, so don't panic buy. That's the message from supermarkets as Tesco and Morrison's reimpose rationing of essentials. We'll talk to the boss of Aldi about how COVID has changed the way we shop.
Good morning from the Savile Garden in Surrey, where we're surrounded by a kaleidoscope of colour. It's a chilly start to the day. For many of us, we'll see some sunshine, especially when the cloud clears the east, but we've got some rain coming in from the west. I'll have all the details later in the programme.
Good morning. It's the 28th of September. It's Monday morning, and the top story this morning is that new laws come into force in England today, which mean that anyone who tests positive for coronavirus or has been told they have been in contact with someone who has, now has a legal duty to stay at home or face a fine.
The government says that the police will check up on those who fail to comply by acting on local intelligence.
Let's take you through the details then this morning. Under the new laws, anyone required to self-isolate but failing to do so will be fined £1,000. And there's a maximum fine now of £10,000 for repeat offenders.
The government hopes the measures will significantly reduce the spread of the virus. People on low incomes who can't work and are losing income while self-isolating will be eligible for a £500 payment.
The fines in England are being introduced as Boris Johnson comes under intense pressure from Conservative backbenchers to give Parliament a say on any new restrictions.
Our political correspondent Ian Watson is in Westminster for us this morning with the very latest. And they are going to, there are lots of discussions in Parliament about all of this week.
That's right. There's a debate on Parliament today about how the coronavirus restrictions are being imposed. But more crucially, on Wednesday, the government has to renew the emergency powers it gave itself 6 months ago, and there are a growing number of Conservative MPs in particular, perhaps around 50 of them, who are now pressing the government to give MPs a say over any new restrictions which would be imposed either across England or across the whole of the UK. It's not clear if that move will be allowed by the Speaker of the House of Commons, but certainly one thing which is undeniable, that there is disquiet on the Conservative benches about the scale and the scope of the emergency measures which the government has taken. One of those measures, of course, includes across the whole country closing pubs and restaurants at 10 o'clock, that curfew. We've seen people out on the streets after the pubs shut over the weekend. And the Care Minister, Helen Whately, was asked about this on this programme, and she said, of course, that the restrictions were still settling down.
It's very early days since the introduction of that policy, and I actually do hope people who are watching, listening today, and anyone planning a night out this week will think, actually now I really get it. I realise that though it might seem like the fun thing to do to keep on partying, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
So the message very much there from the government, from the Care Minister, that people have to take responsibility for their own actions. Of course, if they don't, then it's certainly been discussed within government about having greater restrictions. And of course, there are large swathes of the country, of course, under those greater restrictions now. We've heard about the extension of those restrictions in parts of Wales and South Wales in particular. So the whole of Scotland and in Northern Ireland, there are restrictions on households mixing, not just on the 10 o'clock curfew. But I think what a lot of these Conservative MPs, these potential rebels, want to see is more scrutiny of the government, so they get a greater idea of the evidence that the government's using when it tries to bring in these measures which restrict the way we go about our everyday lives.
OK, Ian, thank you.
The fines in England come as 3 more counties in Wales have extra restrictions imposed later today. That means nearly 2/3 of the country's population will be under lockdown. Let's get a bit more detail on that from our correspondent Moss Morgan, who is in Cardiff Bay for us this morning. Good morning to you. So can you run us through exactly what's going to happen in Wales today?
Right, so last night Cardiff, the capital, and Swansea were put under local lockdown measures. And unexpectedly yesterday, actually, I think nobody was really expecting it. The First Minister held a press conference where he announced that the Vale of Glamorgan, which borders Cardiff, Torfaen, and another one of the local authorities in the South Wales Valleys, and Neath Port Talbot, will also be under local lockdown measures from this evening, following a rise in cases in those areas. Now, the Welsh Government and the authorities had been discussing for a while whether to put the whole of the South Wales region under local lockdown, but the Welsh Government has persisted with local authority lockdown measures. But now it means that there's actually a block in the south central area of Wales, which is where the majority of the population is in Wales, and of course where the economic hub is for Wales, is now under local lockdown measures. What that means is that people can't leave or go into each area without a valid reason, and it also means nobody can mix with people from other households indoors from now on.
Ross, thank you very much for that information. That's the latest on the situation in Wales this morning.
All first year and foundation students at Manchester Metropolitan University will be taught exclusively online for the next 2 weeks to try to stop a coronavirus outbreak from spreading.
1,700 freshers are self-isolating in the halls of residence at the moment after more than 100 tested positive last week. We can get the latest from John McManus.
Spelling it out, the message from fee-paying students in Manchester is clear. As the academic year begins, thousands of them around the UK have been told to self-isolate. It's an unwelcome start for those who've been dreaming of living independently away from home. Manchester Metropolitan University says it's helping with essentials like shopping, laundry access and medicines, but parents have also been on hand. And it's announced that all lessons for first-year students will be online only for the next fortnight. It's a similar story in Glasgow, where Scottish students have been advised not to travel home, and if they must, not to stay overnight. For all new arrivals like these at Newcastle, this year's Freshers' Week will be different.
I'm moving in with the 9 other people in my flat, so we're joining a bubble, and hopefully that's going to keep us safe.
I'm excited but quite nervous just because you don't really know what to expect, but I'm just going to make the most of it.
University authorities say they need to keep students and staff safe.
I think there's enough anxiety, and at the moment any anxiety will exacerbate the situation. So what we want is some clarity, timely information, and I think we will work with the government, Department of Education, to give that assurance to our students.
Last week, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, refused to confirm that students would be allowed to go home at Christmas. For one mother who's just dropped her daughter in Durham, that's a worry.
I'd like her home at Christmas, and I hope that the position we'll get to, because that's 10 weeks away, is I'd like to think that by the time they've gone through this and maybe there has been some local infections and lockdowns, etc., that in 10 weeks' time they might be in a position to let them come home. That's what I hope.
Banned from the student union bar, some new arrivals have managed to see the funny side. But if the restrictions on young adults continue into the autumn term, the mood may turn rebellious. John McManus, BBC News.
Michael Gove is heading to Brussels today as Brexit negotiations between the UK and the EU continue. The two sides are attempting to agree a trade deal post-Brexit, but sticking points remain over fishing rights and business subsidies. Last week, the UK said a lot of work remains to agree a way forward, while the EU say they are determined to reach a deal.
Donald Trump has hit back at a newspaper report claiming he paid just $750, about £590, in income tax in the year that he became president. The New York Times also says he paid no income tax in 10 of the past 15 years. He is the first president since the 1970s not to make his tax returns public, though it's not required by law. At a press conference, Mr. Trump dismissed the reports as fake news.
It's totally fake news, made up, fake. We went through the same stories. You could have asked me the same questions 4 years ago. I had to litigate this and talk about it. Totally fake news.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.